All right, welcome to InsurTech Denver's webinar on February 16th. Today we have a session dedicated to AgentSync as they've recently reached unicorn status, and my guest is Jenn Knight, CTO and co-founder of AgentSync. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. My name is Emily Mertz. I am the head of marketing for Slice, a InsurTech based in New York, but I'm here in Denver, Colorado. So before we jump into a few things, I just wanted to go through a couple of exciting pieces of information. So on behalf of myself, Danielle Turgel, Mark Wheeler, we are those are the co-founders of InsurTech Denver. We're really excited to be helping the Denver InsurTech community grow. So we recently launched a website, insurtechdenver.org, and there you can find the team, our mission, our one-take episodes. Thank you, Mark, for all of those, our webinar recordings, and our upcoming events, which are March 10th. We have a ski trip scheduled for Vail, Colorado. April 20th, we have a cannabis insurance session, and May 25th, a women in insurance session as well. So you can register for all of those on our website. Today's session is being recorded and will be accessible on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So without further ado, back to you, Jenn. Thank you very much again. We're happy to have you here. I'm sure the audience would love to have a quick intro to you and AgentSync.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jenn Knight. I'm co-founder and CTO of AgentSync. We originally started as insurance regulatory compliance software. Mouthful. And when we first came into the space about 2018, early 2019, we realized pretty quickly there was a lot of opportunity to build better business efficiency around onboarding and managing of agents through the life cycle with both carriers and agencies. So we've been focusing on that for the last couple of years, moved to Denver in April 2020. A fun time for all, and started growing the company here. And from that time till today, we've grown from we were maybe 6 people at that point to we're just over 130
Wow.
with about 70% in the Denver area. So
wow, that's amazing. That's good growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what made you guys move from San Francisco to Denver?
Great question. I had worked with a lot of different engineering teams in different places. My husband and co-founder had not, and we've always had this like, do we leave San Francisco? Do we not leave San Francisco? And then we started looking at really, jumping in feet first into AgentSync, and realized that we're so different sides of the business. I'm the CTO, he's the CEO, he does all the go-to-market, all the operations side of the house. And we were really passionate about growing in a place that had talent on both sides. So we wanted to find a place that had engineering talent as well as support and sales and all of the functions that run the business. And so we looked around, and Denver was the place that stood out for us. We really wanted to have a headquarters where we could have all of those teams together, and it made sense. The Bay Area has a lot of fantastic talent. For a small startup that was bootstrapped at the time and not funded, it was not something that we were going to have access to. So that was how we kind of ended up coming out here.
Yeah, and Denver's definitely growing for that scene as well. It's competing with those big names like San Francisco. Yeah. All right, so female executive in the insurance space, husband and wife team, child. You had a child not too long ago during a pandemic, building a startup. Talk to us about that whole journey from start to where we are now.
Yeah, it's something I reflect on a lot. And Niji and I look at each other a lot and go like, how did we get here? Which is always a little bit of a fun moment in a positive way. But I had the privilege of working in some very large scaled organizations in my time in San Francisco, building back office teams. And I think being a woman in tech is and in insurance in its own way, but it's a little bit of a lonely journey at times. But in that journey, I was really supported by a large community of folks out there, and learned how to show up and hold my own, and think about how to be in more challenging situations. So founding a company with my partner was something that was really great in the amount of trust we brought into the partnership from the start. So we, like I mentioned, do very different things day in and day out. And it was amazing to do that with someone we'd worked together before, where we knew our working style, we knew where we were going to butt heads and how we were going to butt heads and how to have those conversations. But we were really united in that goal. And there was no question of, if it's our family or AgentSync, it's our family. But what we're doing in AgentSync, we're doing to support each other, and we're going to make the decisions that support each other. And we don't always have to agree. But if we disagree, we're going to commit and keep moving forward, because we're building it together, originally for our family and now for our larger team.
Right.
I do lovingly joke that you can have a child and build a startup at the same time, but I don't necessarily recommend it. A newborn child. We had our daughter in October 2020. And she has been growing up alongside the business with us. So she actually just walked through the door here because our daycare shut early.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very relatable. But we've been really lucky to have an amazing community here of people who are already parents, modeling what it's like to do that juggle and supporting us as we were learning the challenges that were very real, plus the complexity of COVID.
Yeah. So you recently showed something on LinkedIn where you had a nice, beautiful photo that was cropped, and below the crop line, you can see your daughter crawling at your feet, which I really loved. I loved that you shared that transparency, and I think it's helpful for other women and in the workplace and fathers too to feel that transparency, like I said. So thank you for sharing that. I've seen a few more posts come across that people have done that. It's just nice to see that work-life balance.
Or the work-life scramble, as I lovingly call it.
Right. As you were talking about your daughter, I'm like, I hope she was a good sleeper.
Not so lucky for the first couple months, but she's turned it around. But I've thought, COVID has been very challenging, but in some aspects has been more humanizing. And for us, also being in a new place and still figuring out as new parents what childcare was going to be like. The reality was, if both Niji and I need to be in a place, like our daughter is often with us, and that photo, it was cracking me up, and she was a great sport. But that's very real. It's real for us. It's real for a lot of families and a lot of family businesses. I didn't think I was going to grow up in a tech company, but here she is right now.
Right. I mean, I think back on that old, I don't know how many years ago, but that live broadcast where the father was talking and the kids ran in the room and everyone's like, oh my God, did you see that? But that's totally normalized now, which is fantastic. Yep. Okay. So when you guys, when you started at AgentSync, did you envision reaching unicorn status, or was it just like I think we can get there. I think we've got this.
Yeah, it's we didn't envision it at all. I think that at the time when we started it, we thought that we had a product that would be fit for agencies, probably kind of mid up to about 300 agents. We had tested a hypothesis that Niji had seen of a challenge that he had when he was at Zenefits. So really understood the challenges from the agency space. And then we ended up getting, one of the reasons we started to think about growing the company was we got a couple larger agencies, and then we also ended up working with some carriers. And we realized that the problem that we'd hit on was really ubiquitous. It wasn't just, a thing for an 80-person agency or a 300-person agency. It was everywhere. And that was pretty exciting. We still didn't think that this was going to happen. I think anytime you are in a space like this and you're really trying to learn and test the waters, it's always a bit of like, how far can we get? What is that signal? Should we be building a little bit differently or building bigger? And we kept doing that. And that got us to our A and Series A. And every time we're like, oh, this is amazing. Like, this is kind of where we're going to be. And then figured out that there was actually a lot more opportunity. The other thing I'd say is 3 years in, I kind of mentioned it at the start, our hypothesis of what the industry needed, while it wasn't incorrect, it was a much smaller piece of the puzzle. There are a lot of processes that are quite challenging. Everyone on this webinar knows, right, in the industry, and we're not going to fix every single one, but we realized there was an opportunity to help think about end-to-end workflows in a modern way in the space as you think about information transfer across the multitude of parties that are involved. And those kind of problems are, one, for me as an engineer and as a product person, are really fascinating, but two, they're very big.
Yeah.
And that was how we started walking towards, this valuation and this company size. But if you told me 8 months ago that would have happened, I would, we still were
right.
like, oh, we just are A, everything's great, we're not going to raise again. And then, a few more data points came in, and we thought actually there's a really amazing opportunity here for us to solve some bigger problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of 8 months or longer ago, Jen, you were a guest on one of our first InsurTech Denver webinars. So now I'm curious to go back and watch that and see what you were talking about then, which was maybe 2 years ago.
Yep. Probably a lot more about regulatory compliance, which is obviously still part of our product, and a lot less about platforms and data connectivity.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think some of the major factors were that contributed to the success of the company then?
It's a great question. Something that Niji and I think a lot about is flexibility and knowing what you don't know. So, and then finding someone who not only knows what you don't know, but knows all the things you didn't know, that fun kind of thing. So for us, as we grew, the first hire we brought on, and I probably mentioned this 2 years ago, was a woman, Sandy, who'd been in the insurance space for over 30 years. Sandy knows so much about all of the contours of the industry and was such a critical part of us actually getting to a place where we could have a successful product that expanded beyond our original vision. And Sandy was, a pattern that we have here of when we start to get big enough and we need a team or a function, a marketing team. We've hired a fantastic head of marketing who has many, many years of experience building up teams and doing that reach and kind of across the board. That was a really important thing for us. Flexibility is the opportunity for us is building in a space where both Niji and I know we don't know everything. And that means that we have an opportunity to really listen to our customers, really listen to prospects. They're fantastic, process thinkers in this space. There are people who've had the art of the possible in their mind for years and are really excited to build it with us. And it's our job to listen and think about how we want to productize that in the AgentSync way, but appreciate that there's a kind of standard path, and then there's a ton of non-standard paths depending on the specialty lines you're selling or where you're sitting in, this mix of the workflow. And that's been a huge part of our success, was finding some great partner customers and then listening to what they were saying and then thinking about how we wanted to shift that into our product to make it not only work for them, but also work for a larger audience.
Yeah, that makes sense. So this kind of dovetails then. Talk to me about the culture of the company. You said you grew from, I don't know, six or eight people is what you said, to over 100. So tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's something that we think a lot about. And recently we actually just did a kind of rewrite of our culture and values. When we had hired our COO early on, he'd worked with Niji and I at LinkedIn. And so he kind of knew how we operate, and we'd had a handful, and we sat down and thought, like, really, what do we want to express about being here? What makes us really excited to come to work? And so our values are always be curious, inspire excellence, act like an owner, and customer love. And I could talk about those, but at the end of the day, for us from a culture perspective, a lot of flexibility comes from being curious about what's going on, being okay not being right, being okay feeling a little bit worried about things and a little bit scared and working your way through them. And for us, inspiring excellence was about finding people who challenged us in all the ways, as peers, in terms of like, how do they operate? What can I learn from them about running a team, about growing a skill, about, anything in day out. And that's how we've worked to keep the culture that we were excited to work in alive as we scale. Super, super challenging. And I think about this a lot right now, where we grew so quickly and during COVID that we still have a lot of work to do. It's always work. It's continuous work. It's exciting work. But I'm hopeful that this year we might find our way into a situation where people can be together more often. We still do have a large remote component. So, we bring people into the office hopefully twice a year if the world cooperates. But yeah, it's a big part of our thinking of, as we interview folks too, of, do they want to be in a space where there is a lot of uncertainty, and therefore, some people love that and some people don't. And that's totally okay. If you love that and you want to come solve some weird problems, like, we'd love to have you. And if you need something that's a little bit more consistent, that's also okay too.
Yeah. So speaking of hiring, I saw heading east on 70, I feel like it was near Wadsworth. I saw a billboard for AgentSync, which I was excited to see. So that's awesome. It was about hiring. So kudos to you guys for putting that one up.
Yes, it was Niji's idea, and we love it. It sparks a lot of joy. We've had a lot of people say, I'm like, even if it's just like, oh, I saw it going by, I'm like, yeah, like, who does billboards these days?
Right. Right. Very nostalgic. Yeah. So we touched a little bit on the crop line with your daughter below it, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more about balancing that, like, husband-wife duo, the work-life balance or equilibrium. I mean, you guys you're not in an office, so, full-time, it sounds like, but sorry for the dog barking. That's my interruption here. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this probably resonates with anyone. It changes all the time. I think you're learning all the time. We were very lucky to have a childcare, a Montessori daycare in our neighborhood that we love, and we were able to put our daughter in fairly early. COVID has presented its own challenges with that, and I would be lying if I said it wasn't just hectic. You have days where school gets canceled and we're really struggling to figure out who takes what half of the day or who takes the day as the parent. I think that's pretty typical. I think though, for us, like, is that as a family business, which is kind of funny to say for this company, but it is, we know that setting each other up for success is our job. And how do we do that? How do you support someone as they're going through a really hard thing that you also can really see? I think that's actually the upside for us, where we used to work at different companies and we come home and you're sharing the context you have and your partner's trying to support you, and they have the part of the picture that you've told today, and they don't always have the full context of what's happening in your organization, where we have that support of saying, like, okay, I can understand it. I can soundboard with you. I can also maybe help, like, across the org get to a right answer, which is great. I've kind of given up on balance. Personally, I think it's all a little bit of a mess in startups, or maybe it's balance over the course of a year, not balance over the course of a week. Some weeks are crazy, some days are just crazy, and so we just work really hard to see the other person. And even if we were supposed to have the day work this way, that's not always what the other partner needs. And now we're trying to figure out how to take vacations. I was like, we can do all this, and then that's gonna be the big win of 2022, when we figure out how to take a vacation and actually a little bit.
For sure. Yeah, I don't think of balance in terms of days. I think, I'm like, when do I can jam all this in, and then when do I have some reprieve? What day can I finish, catch up on all the stuff I need to catch up on? That's how I think about things too. So what are any advice for female executives in this space, women in insurance, which we're definitely underrepresented, or just startups in general, especially here in Denver?
Yeah, it's a big one. I have thought a lot about it in the sense that I think one of the most important things that I learned early in my career with support of some other women on my team is, if you think it's happening, it's probably happening. And if you're lonely, know that other women are lonely too. And it can be really hard. You can have to show up and, put on that face and be the only woman in the room, or be the only woman in a certain situation, or not necessarily feel like you have a voice in things. And I've coached some younger women on this too, where they're like, well, it's okay because this is happening. No, I'm like, I'll take a pause. It's happening. It's real. I want to feel how we're going to work through it and get to the other side of it. And there's a whole bunch of different strategies. Some are going to feel good for some people, some are going to feel good for others. I've looked a lot in my career on making sure that I've always built support networks. Those are peers, men and women of, who can I go to in the organization to have a trusted conversation with? How can I think about working with that person to help get my voice heard? Working with people who have helped me strategize on speaking with executives. I had a great friend who was in a business consulting and kind of management consulting, and she was fantastic at building decks, and I was not great at it. And I had to present to an audit committee, and I would just sit down at lunch with her and say, like, all right, like, give me the brutal, honest truth. This is going to be painful, but I know I'm going to be better for it. And you are a trusted ally in this. You don't have any say in my outcomes personally, but you know that we can support each other across the organization. So I've always looked to other women in my space who have strengths that I don't have, and men, like I said, other people in the space who have strengths that I don't have, and just create that opportunity to say, like, I need your support to help me get over this hurdle. I don't think any of it is rocket science, but I think the most important thing for me realizing early on was it's going to not always be easy, and it's sometimes going to feel really uncomfortable. And if I can look into that and work my way through it, I'm going to have a better outcome. But I think a lot of us are taught to sort of minimize it and put it away. And that doesn't help you, and it doesn't help the other people in the room learn too.
Right. No, that's great advice. Yeah. So what about for advice for startups in Denver, or, anywhere, I guess?
Yeah. Ooh. Advice for startups. I mean, we're still learning a lot of things along the way. I think the thing that I've actually loved, and I'll give credit to Niji for this, is we started doing cross-team celebrations of company wins very early. So we have a funny thing we call the Ball Pit Award, which when Niji was the only salesperson, if we had a deal that was over 100K, it would be a celebration, and it would be a celebration not of Niji closed a deal, it was of another individual in the organization who exemplified our values, and that person got to pick an award for the organization. So we have company Traeger, we have a team we've given to teams have given to charities. We have had teams go out on trips together to have some team bonding time. But what it did for us really early on was remove some of the barriers and ideas of sales is over there selling, and you're over here building. It's everything that you can do to make sure that your company is a team sport, as kind of cheesy as that sounds, is really, really important. As you scale up, having strong relationships between all parts of your organizations and trusted relationships is really critical, so that customer success can come and tell product something isn't working, and they can do it in a way where they know product will hear them and respond to it, and valuing that relationship just across all the different parts of the organization. So as it gets harder and harder to do that as you scale, and emphasizing that activity early on has been really beneficial to us. And then modeling it, from a leadership perspective, but you can't model something that isn't, you can model it, but you really have to have built that connectivity. So think about that a lot.
So would it be fair to say that in your growth as a company, it's mostly been with remote employees? Or was there a time when there was a good chunk of your employees working in an office together?
It's a ebb and flow. We have emphasized hiring in the called the greater Denver area. So, we have people out in Evergreen, and we have people, now we have someone out in Steamboat, which is not the Denver area that you've gone past, but we have it's changing all the time, so I'm probably get this number a little bit wrong. I think about 90 or maybe about 100 of the employees are here in Denver. Now with COVID and everything, we haven't had an opportunity for everyone to be together, and we're not you have to work in the office full time. Well, so we've been focusing on hiring more in hubs, and then we have a handful of remote employees. We were remote early on. Our first employees were remote. Our first hires were in Kansas, and we were in California. So, depending on the month of the year, it's moved around a lot. But we actually have an office here in Rhino in Denver that we thought was going to be big enough for us for a long time, and we'll see. But we're starting to have some folks have an opportunity to come and work together.
Cool. But you've been able to keep that culture that you were just talking about with the awards and whatnot, even with a remote team and keep everyone engaged.
Yeah, and I've talked about this with a handful of other founders. What I would say is no one has the answer, and every team is different, right? But because we had built some of the remote muscle early, we fared a bit better. Things that I'm thinking about right now, and we just did our first engagement survey, are how do you think about centralization of content? And we didn't do a great job of that early, and that's a challenge for any organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now when you're more remote early on, it becomes a bottleneck much earlier than I've seen in other places that I've worked. So a couple of other organizations, they became a big problem at about 300 people, where people weren't in the same office, they weren't seeing each other. Now, we're 130 and a lot of us aren't in the same office, and we can't see each other, and we need to start really building that kind of information flow internally. So there's the things you get right and there's the things you get wrong.
Sure.
But I'm quite excited to see kind of how people start to solve that, who are starting to form, and we're one of them, but we have some work. I'm excited to see what others do to think about that remote first startup, and what are the tools and the techniques you use, not only for culture, but just for company growth, and communication.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. Well, I've seen some messages, some questions come through, so I'd like to save a few minutes for that. First question, have you found the insurance industry supportive of women executives? Any difference from any other industries you have worked with?
I did share it. So I wouldn't say insurance is different. I'd say that as a woman in the tech side of the house, I still do occasionally have those conversations where I'm like, no, you do not need to explain that technology to me. I am aware of it. And that is not unique to insurance. I found it to be very accepting and welcoming on the whole. We've had really great, the customers that I get to overlap with and the experiences I've had. I haven't, had a negative experience in this industry in particular. I think the challenges that women face in executive positions are also kind of universal. I'm sure there are some industries that are a bit better, but if you're the lonely few, it's going to feel a little challenging from time to time. Yeah.
All right. Another question. Do you think it will be harder to maintain the unicorn status than achieving the status?
It's a really great question. We have a very solid plan on how we're getting there. Is it going to be a ton of work? Yes. It is maintaining that status, doubling your revenue repeatedly is not a small feat by any stretch. So we talk about it internally right now. We have been charging a very big hill, and now we are charging an even bigger hill, and it needs a lot more support to do that. I think about it as maybe not harder, just it's a different flavor, because now we have the capital and the opportunity to build a lot of the functions in a very meaningful way that we didn't before. And so that was, us bringing in a head of marketing and really building out that function. I brought in a VP of engineering, and she's tripling our engineering team this year. And those things are difficult in their own right of that build part, but they do set the foundation for that next round of scale. So it's a really different type of challenge than it was in the early days when you're like alone banging your head against the wall. But I'm gonna go with check back with me in a year and I'll tell you.
Okay, sounds good. Another question, what in your career has prepared you for entrepreneurship and running a company?
So I would say I was very lucky, and I've thought about this actually quite a bit. I'm like, what would the skill be that I would encourage someone to learn to do this? And I had the opportunity when I was at Dropbox to report to their CFO, a woman named Vanessa Whitman. And Vanessa was fantastic at allowing me to tackle really complicated things that I'd never done before, put me out on the ice and support me if I wasn't going the right direction. and kind of pick me up and dust me off and keep me going down that path. And that was where I moved from working in sales systems or on the Salesforce ecosystem to taking up finance systems, doing something that you've never done before repeatedly, and understanding how to be comfortable with the fact that you are not going to be the best at it ever. You're never going to have the most information. You need to trust the people who work for you. You need to find great people to work for you. You need to support them and empower them. A lot of that I learned at Dropbox, how to do that, how to start doing that, with the support of someone who said, it's okay, you don't have to know everything. Your job isn't to know everything. Your job is to empower others. And I think about that as a founder of, you will not be able to do every role. It's not real. And you have to be able to let things go. And you have to know that, like, sometimes things aren't going to work the way you expected. And so if you can get experience with someone who will support you to take on the scariest thing you've ever done. The scariest thing I ever did then was present to an audit committee. I had no idea what I was doing. It was terrifying. I was like, these are the members of our board. And a lot of those skills are the things I think about all the time right now, where I'm like, when I feel scared, how do I look at that, not panic, move forward, get the right resources in the room to give me more information and try to figure out how to make a decision. And so that is everywhere. That's not just in startups, but if you have an opportunity to learn with someone who helps you do that, or have the opportunities to learn, that's the skill, I think.
Yeah, for sure. There's something I say to my child who's 4, I say it all the time, which is from the book Untamed, that you can do hard things, right? And the same advice for me, right? It's just a good, simple reminder every single day.
Yep.
All right. Another question. It feels like AgentSync is unique in the market. Do you feel you have any true competitors? And if not, why?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we have, the traditional folks in this space, Reg Ed, Circon, Vertafore, have been tackling this problem for a while. As early on, we kind of realized that we wanted to tackle it a different way. And we really think about the end-to-end business process and flow. And so that's why for where we're going on what we're doing right now, we do not have, I would say, put my head of a CTO hat on, I'm head of product, and say, like, we do not have a true competitor in the market who is thinking about the strategy around data and workflows in the way that we are.
Cool. There's a few more questions here. Can you share more about who your customers are and how you work with them?
Yeah, so we have customers all over. We have carriers, we have MGAs, we have MGUs, we have agencies, and those are of all sizes. They're also spanning all, we call them, I always get this like line of authority, all different types of insurance. So, life, health, property, casualty, personal lines, and, travel, and on and on and on, that fun stuff. And that was actually a really interesting thing for us early on. And I would say it owes to my not being in a background of insurance. When we built the product, we looked at the data and the data models and the flows involved, and said, like, okay, like, let's just like build to solve for those. And what we found is those are the same across all of those, different types of insurance. And then there's actually those workflows, how you think about them from a carrier and an agency perspective. There's different starts and ends, but there's a lot of similarities in how we could model out the product. So it was a little bit of a fluke. I didn't have the knowledge to know that I should probably just focus on one. So we started with a foundation of many, and we've had to customize and make certain features for certain parts of the industry, but our base actually covered the majority of the workflow across all that surface area. How we work with customers, we're primarily right now working with their back office kind of licensing administration and administration teams. So the teams that are onboarding agents, if you're an agency, you're running licensing, making sure that they have the right licenses and appointments to do their job. If on the carrier side, it's about the contracting piece, bringing the agents on, getting them through the appointment workflow, and then also terminating and doing those more in scaled motions. So obviously, carriers thinking about this in the thousands, tens of thousands, where an agency is probably at a little bit of a smaller scale.
Yeah, cool. Okay, next question. You studied international relations. How does what you studied teach you how to learn and grow?
So I love another international relations major. I always said I studied diplomacy, and diplomacy is a huge part of, because it is a huge part of business. And part of that exercise is actually thinking about human problems. And that's why I studied international relations. I was really interested in how people work or don't work well together. How do you think about that from, how do we build culture and community? How do those communities work peacefully or have conflict? And a business is that, right? And a lot of my early career was actually around systems design. And the fun part about that is there's no right answer. So you're going to always have situations where people are going to come with different perspectives, and they should. And my job was to help them get to the most appropriate answer with the information we had on hand that made people feel successful moving forward. Yeah. If that isn't international relations and diplomacy work, I'm not sure what is outside of the actual work of it. So I went to school on the East Coast. I went to Boston University, but I had to go back to California for family reasons. And there weren't a lot of opportunities to use that degree in the traditional sense. But I find that you spend so much time thinking about how people work together and what drives conflict in that study. And that is the same smaller scale organizations.
Very cool. Next question. What is the most important problem you're trying to solve at the moment, technically? If you can share.
Yeah, no, we are in the process right now of diversifying our product mix. And one of the things that we're building a product on, I think there's two things I would say. But the first is we have a new product that'll be coming out in the contracting space. And carrier contracting is incredibly complicated. There are a lot of different touch points in that workflow, and there are a lot of different ways that you would think about presentation of contract documentation to an individual. And so it's a really interesting space in the reality that you have to design for a lot of unknowns, because there is no world in which we can collect every single carrier contract today and hand it to engineering and say, like, this is every permutation you could ever have. You have to think a ton about all these varying permutations, a bunch of dependency management, as well as data sensitivity, right? So there's just layers and layers and layers on that. I think from a problem solving perspective, that's an interesting one. How do we want to implement that? The other thing that we're thinking, a lot about right now is refactoring for scale. So pretty typical anywhere, you're going to make a design. I made a bunch of design decisions early on when we thought we were going to be a company that was selling, standalone applications built on the App Exchange to small agencies. That's not what we do today. What the original design scaled pretty well, and I'm the first one to say, like, and then it didn't. And we had to move, some technologies onto the AWS stack. We think a lot about how we're going to scale up the next round. What do we need to move off in terms of services? And then how do we think about building services against data partners that are going to have challenges of their own as they're going through their own transformation. So a lot of the insurance industry is doing moves to the cloud, is moving to REST APIs. They're in transition, we're building, and there's a lot of interesting challenges of thinking how to build a robust system that way. So those are the kind of top two that come to mind.
Okay, cool. We probably have time for one or two more. So next one, how has the VC community felt about your Colorado headquarters and the talent pool you have to grow from seed to present?
So I'll say in 2020, maybe pre-pandemic, people were like, "You're moving to Colorado? Like, you're moving to Colorado for what?" I'm like, "Why are you doing that? Like, why are you?" There were two camps actually.
Sure.
There was a camp that was like, "I've been to Colorado. Colorado is amazing. Let me tell you a story about I like know tech in Colorado or whatever." And then there was a camp of like, "Why would you leave the Bay Area?" 8 months into the pandemic, there was like, "So you're in Colorado? Tell me more about that." Right. What does that look like? And how are you going there? I think at the end of the day, and VCs are changing in this way. A lot of VCs left the Bay Area too, right? So they're headquartered in different places. And they're thinking, I hope, I don't know, it's not universally true, but I really hope that it changes some of the dialogue to who is running it, what is the talent they have, what is their vision versus where they are. Sure. And there's still a lot of there's still going to be cachet in Silicon Valley, of course. But we have an opportunity. And one of the reasons we're excited to be here is to say, there are other places with great talent. They can do this same thing. You don't all have to be centralized in the same place. But VCs have been, after we proved that we had a really good business, they don't care where we are.
Sure, right.
And we've proven that there's fantastic talent here that can build up this business with us. So hopefully that's a good proof point for the next person who goes and raises.
Good, thanks. All right, we'll do one more. So how much educating do you provide your customer or your customers, or is required to implement AgentSync products? Are they tech savvy?
Yeah. So on the whole, I think I found our customers very tech savvy. I think there's a kind of an impression of it's the insurance industry, what have they been up to? I mean, we do have customers with mainframes and other things. And they've had to deal with changes in technology for sometimes decades.
Mm-hmm.
And are they always on the forefront? Some of them are, some of them aren't. But what we've found is there's quite a big appetite to do things better. And we have amazing partners in our customers who are saying, okay, I want to do it better. Maybe this isn't, my first strength, but let's sit down and think about the product together. And then I can also give you some feedback on how we could make it even better from there. So from requiring it to implement, our implementations are pretty straightforward. A lot of it is mapping process, old process to the new technology. And what we've seen more and more as we've had customers for several years is once they integrate it into their process, there's just a ton of opportunity that they surface where they can improve. And so it's been exciting, but I have been really, really impressed with the vision that a lot of our customers have of what they want to do. They haven't always had a technology to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And we aren't always a perfect fit and we're not always there yet for everything they need, but we have flexibility in our platform to get them there. And that's just cool.
Yeah.
I think personally, I'm oh, it's pretty cool. You haven't had that opportunity before, but we can help create that space.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, taking your time out of your day. What you guys have accomplished is amazing. I personally am really impressed, being that you have a young child, building a startup, reaching unicorn status during a pandemic. No easy feat there. So kudos to you guys and your entire team. And thank you again for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.
Bye.